Very nice.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim HANINK here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos-Reyes and Christopher ZENDHER. This week, we travel to Sweden. The American Solidarity Party draws on the Christian democracy movement. Our guest this Wednesday is Lennart SACREDEUS, representing the Swedish Christian Democrats, KD. He has served as a member of parliament in Sweden and as a member of the European Parliament. Currently, he is Speaker Mayor of the city of Mora. As always, we begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Let us pray. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit, we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Mario, can you be our leader?
Yes. Good morning, Dr. Lennart SACREDEUS. I hope that I'm pronouncing well your last name.
Very well. SACREDEUS, we pronounce it in Swedish. So you did it very well. Sadly, I'm not a doctor, but it would have been an honor to be it. But basically a professional. I'm a high school teacher in religion, political science, and history.
Okay. Well, we have a few questions for you today. The first one is the obvious one. Could you tell us a little bit about the Swedish Christian Democrats? What are the ideals, the platform, whatever you wanted to say about the party?
Thank you very much. I try to be fairly brief, and please put forward your follow-up questions, because otherwise it could be too much of a monologue. First of all, I'm born 1957. I'm a professional high school teacher, as I said. I had the honor to be an exchange student to Ravenna, Michigan, which is a small rural town between Lake Michigan and Grand Rapids in in west central Michigan. I actually flew over that very hour when Richard Milhous Nixon resigned as the president, and the new president, Gerald R. Ford, his constituency was Grand Rapids, where he had been a long-serving member in the House of Representatives. So suddenly the president of the United States came from the area where I lived for 1 year. I entered the Christian Democratic Party in 1984. In 1998, I became deputy mayor of my town Mora in west central Sweden, fairly close to Norway, and 4 hours away from Stockholm on train or car. And in the year after, 1999, I surprisingly was elected to the European Parliament as one of two Swedish Christian Democrats. I served there for 5 years, commuting from my small town down to Brussels and in Belgium, and Strasbourg in France. In 2004, I came back to my family again, and 2 years later, I was elected to the Swedish National Parliament, serving there for 4 years till 2010. Since then, I have taken up my teaching again. I write regularly in a Christian daily paper called The World Today, in Swedish Världen idag, about foreign politics and also some historical moments, including Mayflower coming to the US 400 years ago, last Saturday, and you celebrating Thanksgiving tomorrow. And I've written also about the US presidential election. I'm also in local politics and became 2 years ago, which is some sort of combination between mayor and speaker of the local assembly in this town of Mora, which is maybe most well known for its cross-country ski race the first Sunday in March, which is the longest and the largest and the oldest Nordic cross-country ski race. And in normal days, it attracts some 60,000 skiers for a whole week, but it is not normal days, as you know, with a pandemic. That's a little about me. I think the key thing that we share together as Christian Democrats on the western side of the Atlantic, and the eastern part of the Atlantic here in Sweden and you in the United States, it is that in politics, success does not come easily. It does not come very speedily. You have to have a lot of stamina, and you have a long-term determination that what you do and your service could benefit future generations, maybe not in your own lifetime even. It took our party 27 years from its foundation in 1964 till 1991. It took our party 27 years to enter at all the Swedish national parliament due to a 4% threshold that you have to surpass in order to enter the Swedish national parliament, Riksdagen, the German word Reichstag. But you have to remember that one of the big differences that we have in between us is that you have a different electoral system with a winner takes it all, the majority winner takes it all system, where we have a proportional representation system. And I must say that these 27 years, that's the big question. How did a party survive without success during these 27 years? And I will give the floor to you, and you might guess, and then you can maybe bounce back to me again.
Going back to my original question, what our audience may want to know is about what were the reasons you joined the Christian Democrat? Were there some ideals there that attracted you so that you moved into the party, or something else?
There were definitely ideals, and there are ideals. Some of them we might come back to if we find time, that you could dispute how well they are cared for and preserved and pushed for, emphasized. But the idea of building a party upon the Christian Western civilization, defending its values, its view on the human person, and also defending the role of family, religious freedom, and the role of spiritual life, and having a view of man founded in the Christian faith and the Christian view, that man is not just only physical personality, but also there is a spirit to being a human person. These all together, we are a centrist party. We stand up for a social and ecological market economy. We believe that the human person has a good will, but also that the human person has proved in history, but also the Christian faith says so also, that we can be masters of destruction and of evilness. And therefore we belong that there is no society, there is no human person, and there is no political party that ever will be perfect. There will always be, including among Christian Democrats and Christian Democratic parties, a lot of shortcomings. But still, we'd like to step by step gradually improve our society based upon family, Christian ethics, the Christian view on the political, on the human person, and also stewardship when it comes to society and the creation. And on top of that, creating a sense of fellowship among people in your own nation, but also worldwide. These could be some of the basic views of Christian democracy in Sweden, but I would also say in general in Europe as well.
Yes. Jim, you want to say something to Dr.
Yes, I'd like to begin with a question that was submitted by one of our listeners. And roughly the question is this: what's the general structure of church-state relations in Sweden?
Thank you for bringing up this question. I mean, as the rest of Europe, we were a Catholic country till the Reformation came here in the 1500s. And formerly, Sweden became a Lutheran country in 1593, gradually having entered in that direction. And the church in Sweden became Church of Sweden with a strong connection to the state, to the royal house, and also officially an established church, a so-called state church. That position, gradually changing though, stayed until 2000, the year 2000. So from beginning, January 1st, 2000, there is not an established church in Sweden. Still Church of Sweden with gradually shrinking membership, which is down to now 57% of the population. When I grew up, it was 90%. We lose, Church of Sweden loses about 1.5% of the population in membership gradually. So not many years to come, it will be a minority of the Swedish population belonging to Church of Sweden. There is a law that takes care of the relationship between Church of Sweden and the Swedish state, telling the Swedish Church, Church of Sweden, to be a church covering the total area of Sweden, being one of the largest countries in Europe, actually. We also have other churches, including what we say free churches that could be called evangelical churches, like Pentecostals, Baptists, covenant churches, and so on, and churches that have primarily some sort of background in migration and immigration churches, like the Catholic Church, and also different Orthodox churches. So that's the religious picture. But Church of Sweden is, I would say, a liberal Lutheran church, even more liberal than some of the Lutheran churches that we have over in the United States. But within the church, it's a lot of variety and pluralism, which also tells that there are more conservative, more biblical parts of the church, as well as many of the free churches are more biblical and theologically more conservative. Church going is very low in Sweden, sadly low. It's much, much less than in the United States. Although, as I pointed out, membership statistically sounds fairly impressive, with about 65% of, maybe 65 to 70% of the population belonging to a Christian denomination.
Thank you. That's helpful background for us.
Christopher?
Yes. You mentioned one of the things I want to clarify some more what you mean by political democracy, or Christian democracy. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I know what you mean by political democracy, I think.
Yeah.
But you mentioned a social and ecological market economy. I think oftentimes, when we talk about the economy in the United States, our terms are very different. And I think this terminology would be very foreign to most Americans. So perhaps if you would, please explain what you mean by a social and ecological market economy.
Yes, thank you so much, Christopher, for your question. The term is not invented by Christian democracy in Sweden, but the leading Christian Democratic Party in entire Europe, the CDU, Christian Democratic Union of Germany, especially in the 50s during Chancellor Konrad Adenauer and his successor, who most of the time Konrad Adenauer was Chancellor of West Germany. This man was Minister of Finance, Ludwig Erhard. And that was to define that we believe in private ownership, which is also reconciled within the Catholic social teaching. But there should be a social and ecological framework within a market economy. You would maybe in America more speak about capitalism, which has another we put it into maybe another type of context, other type of emotions in Europe or in a country like Sweden than market economy. So it's private ownership within a social and ecological framework, reconciled with the Catholic social teaching, and emphasizing both the freedom and the responsibility you have as an entrepreneur, but also as a person with private ownership. This would be very, in a very short way, an attempt to try to explain this terminology.
And perhaps, if you would, just give a few examples of the social aspect. I think the free economy is fairly clear, but the social aspect, what that entails.
Yes, very good. Well, social does not mean socialism, but it means that there is a social concern, that there is a concern about the well-being of the entire population, and that we have a social network and social security systems that we sometimes call welfare, but that's a term that has its own connotation in the American context as well. But that we built up social security systems. There are basically three of them in Europe, if you make it very broad. You have a liberal one, which is more emphasized on private solutions. You have a Christian democratic, which is a mixture of private and state, but with a great role for churches and charities and other organizations to be part of that. And then you have the social democratic, mainly Scandinavian model, which is primarily state or municipal run. So these are social security systems that are based upon little different, should we say factors, or should we say elements? And that's what we mean with a social framework within the economy, trying to balance out that in a free market economy there will be people with which will be better off and worse off. Of course, it will be the same, more than so, even worse when it comes to justice and equality, when it comes to a communistic or purely socialistic economical system, which Europe has tried in its Eastern Soviet-dominated countries until 1989, 1990.
If I can jump in there, when Lennart was talking about this, the view from Sweden, from Europe, that remind me about the same framework that Christian democracy established in Latin America. So the idea of capitalism itself, the term, has a very bad connotation. Now, you can trace back that to the tradition of the Catholic Church and many other factors. But the idea is not the preeminent role of the state. It's not a statism. But it's not what in Latin America is called individualism either. It's a middle ground. Eduardo Frei, in his campaign 1960, called revolution, yes, but in liberty. So still there is a role for the market. Now, they did not call capitalist market precisely because the connotation was really very confusing, particularly for the lower classes, if we want to talk about this term. So in American context, I can say something about that, maybe called communitarianism. So exactly, in other words, principle of subsidiarity. So the state has the money in order to promote intermediate institutions, and they themselves can begin their journey through empowerment and entrepreneurship and so on. That is a very difficult proposition because you are in the middle of two monsters, so to speak. The socialists on the one hand, or the populists, and on the other, the individualists, just free marketeers. So, and I think in Latin America, we inherited pretty much that's those ideas that come from Europe. That's my take. So going back to your reference to the CDU, I think it's very interesting. You mentioned Adenauer and Erhard. Do you think that these figures, these really witnesses of Christian democratic movement are still alive among young people, at least in small groups, or the memory of these people are completely gone?
Well, thank you, Mario, for your very important question. I'm not a German myself, and in these days you travel quite in a quite limited way. But I would say that there are different generations of unique West German and now German leaders after World War II that are Christian Democrats. Konrad Adenauer was the first generation, Helmut Kohl the second, and the third is Chancellor Angela Merkel, who is to resign within a year. It will be less than a year that the new Bundestag, the new German parliament, will be elected. So in that context, the heritage of Adenauer is mentioned, definitely, and of Helmut Kohl, and in days to come, they will speak about the heritage from Angela Merkel. The memory is, of course, less there due to that it goes back to 1963 when Konrad Adenauer resigned at the age of 87. Some thought that he should maybe have resigned even earlier. But I would say that the basic pillars of this Christian Democratic Party, you know, is Bavarian sister party, CSU, Christian Social Union. These foundations are still very solid. And if a party makes it well from the beginning, I think it has a lot of options for days to come. But if things goes wrong in the beginning, it's much complicated to make it correct afterwards. And I think that both these Christian Democratic parties in the Federal Republic of Germany had a good start. They also had an old heritage from the Zentrum, the Center Party, which was founded already in the 1870s, and which was a Catholic People's Party, mostly defending the rights of the Catholic minority in the German Reich, in the German Empire, or the German Kingdom, defending their rights to have their own school, religious liberties, their own holidays, and so on. But it was very important, and I think this is a part of the Christian Democratic movement also in Sweden, that we are truly an ecumenical party, a party for different Christian faiths, but also for persons without Christian faith, but persons of goodwill. But we are not a party that is the right party to enter for people that are against Christianity, that are against faith and religion, and that are critical to the Christian role in history and in society. And I think we should be clear with that. But you don't have to have a person of faith in that sense. I think also that what Konrad Adenauer did was that he wrote a constitution, and the Christian Democrats wrote a constitution which recognizes the role of faith, the role of God, and the role of the state to always defending the life. And therefore, in one of the two hard questions to reconcile when East and West Germany united, one was which capital, stay with Bonn or move back to Berlin, and the other question being the question of the legal status for the unborn child. In that question, which is normally called the question of abortion, the German constitution ruled that Germany could not have a liberal anti-fetus legislation as East Germany had. And therefore it ruled, when the Christian Social Union in Bavaria overturned or called for a judicial find if it was constitutional or not, like your Supreme Court, ruled that you could not have a so-called liberal abortion law in the Federal Republic of Germany.
Thank you. Jim, you have us.
Yes, I want to raise another question from one of our regular listeners. And the way the question was put was very blunt. And because it was so blunt, I'll expand on it a bit. The question was, does Lennart have any advice for the American Solidarity Party on how to become, quote, a real party? I understand that to be a party that actually has people elected to public office. When I hear that, a real party, I'm reminded of students who from time to time, over my 40 years in the trenches, would refer to the so-called real world. And I would always tell them why I think we're already in a real world.
Yeah.
And the American Solidarity Party already is a real party, but you could count on one hand the number of elected officials. At the same time, since the last presidential runaround, we've quadrupled our national votes. And so I think we're making progress. At any rate, Lennart, how do we become a real party?
Thank you. We have asked ourselves that question for decades, maybe still do, but less so since we have been a party in the Swedish National Parliament since 1991. We have been in the what we call government, you would call it administration, at different times between 91 and 94, between 06 and 14. So we have been in the administration also for 11 years altogether, and we've been in the national parliament for 29 years, soon 30 years. I think that humility, determination, conviction, and a long-term perspective, that you don't give in, and also focus on what unites and not all these details which you always can differ upon, is one of the key mental elements to consider. Another one is rejoice, rejoice, rejoice over every success, and start with the local political life. Our party would never have survived, since it took 27 years to enter the national parliament, if we had not been a local party. Here in my town in Mora, where I did not grow up, but came as a high school teacher in 1984, the Christian Democrats entered here in the local political assembly in 1966, 2 years after the foundation of the party. It has been a part of local politics in this municipality of 20,000 people since 1966. On the regional level, now we have different political systems, and the United States is divided in different ways than Sweden is, with your 50 states and your counties, your townships and cities and so on. But anyhow, we reach also the regional level, which in Sweden is responsible especially for the healthcare system. We entered that also in the 60s. So we build up a base gradually, but this is also due to that we have a proportional election system, which you don't have in the big elections. But my question back to you is that don't you have some sort of proportional election system, electoral system, when it comes to local assemblies, or is it just one elected per ward or constituency in your towns? Because I think that you could build up some sort of local base here and there where you would find enthusiastic and good and decent people. And from there on, you can gradually build, but you should never start with we're going to take the White House, we're going to take the House, we're going to take the Senate. we're going to take the governors, but be happy to get a seat here and a seat there, in a town there and another township there, and maybe in a county or whatever.
Yes, that's very much what we want. We have focused on the presidential race as a way of educating the general public who we are. I have just one quick follow-up question. I think at one point you mentioned something like not being distracted by particular things. Tell us about the campaign against Swedish snuff.
Oh, okay.
That seemed to me to be, to use an American term, funky.
Yeah. I would not say, dear friends in the US, that it has been a profile question for the Christian Democratic Party. But when Sweden, after a fairly close, quite close, less close though than your presidential election, but a fairly close referendum in 1994, we entered the EU, or it was then called, it was called EU at that time, January 1st, 1995. This became some sort of one of the symbolic questions when it comes to the Swedish treaty and the Swedish negotiations with the European authorities, snuff or not. And it was accepted in Sweden, I believe also in Finland, but we could not export it. But for some political elements, being critical to the EU and also trying to reach a special electorate and also anti-EU sentiment, this was, of course, a question of liberty and national independence and self-determination. But it would be wrong to say that we have benefited from that question. We also think that you could have a peace project and a cooperation in Europe without being strict on snuff, to be honest. So it could also be an expression of the EU trying to enter into too many details as well. But of course, yes. Okay, they see it as a health question, and we have to respect that.
I understand. Now, I thought that snuff in Sweden might have an extra kick or something.
Yes, but not in my life.
Yes.
But my brother-in-law, my wife's younger brother, for him it's important. So it's close in the family as well. Yes,
I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Christopher?
Yeah, you're talking about the differences in electoral arrangement in Sweden and the United States. I mean, we don't have proportional representation. I can't think of any on any level. Two, one of the reasons why a party like the American Solidarity Party focuses on the presidency is because, for the most part, most people in the United States don't really care all that much for local politics. They're not very interested in it at all. I've been interested in it for years, but most people just don't seem to care. So it's the national election, generally every 4 years, which gets everybody worked up. What is it like there? What is in Sweden? Is there much more interest in local politics amongst the populace, or is it?
Yeah. Excuse me, please continue.
No, I'm just basically. I mean, and how would you have any advice for a place like ours where we don't have that kind of interest?
Thank you so much for your crucial and important question. I would like to be a little personal from the beginning. My experience when I have been in the United States, I've had the privilege a number of times to serve as a guest lecturer especially for the J term, the January term, at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, southern Minnesota. Gustavus Adolphus College is the oldest Swedish American Lutheran college in the entire United States. And my wife and I came there during our honeymoon in 1986, and we met a professor of Swedish extraction. And during my term in the European Parliament, I got in touch with the college again. And my view is that a lot of people in the United States, when asked about Swedish Christian Democrats or European Christian Democrats, a lot of them, not all, of course, but they like our view, emphasizing the role of the family, the independence of the family, and that the family is the most important unit in entire society. They like our emphasis on religious freedom, on the role of faith and religion to building a good society, and Christian principles like stewardship and Christian ethics and the Christian view of man. They like that. But that would make them, and they also, a lot of them have a very strong sense of what is a culture of life, and how that differs to a culture of death, of euthanasia, abortions, and so on. So they share that. At the same time, they would like to have a just society with access to education, to college education as well, without you having to have a too good of a family economy. You would like to have a health system that works and is not depending on your wallet as well. They would like to have some sort of social justice and social equality, but they would share that with what we would call value conservative attitudes in many areas when it comes to sanctity of life and family and the role of faith. And maybe there is some sort of problem in the US two-party system, so much based upon your electoral system, winner takes it all, that they like one thing in the one party and they like another thing in the other party, and then they have to choose between these two. And maybe the American Justice Party could attract people, but you have to start locally. And let's maybe later on enter the national political field as well, where these two views are combined. The sanctity of life, traditional Christian values, the role of family, but also social justice. And I notice that the solidarity that you have in your name is a way of expressing one of these elements. I would also say that the Christian democracy have normally two names in Europe. We either call ourselves Christian Democrats, as we do in the Nordic countries, as we do in Germany, as we do in the Benelux countries. But otherwise, we call us, like in Spain or in Austria, People's Party. We are a People's Party. We are a party for all the people, trying to reach all people and be good for all people. So I think that your future is to attract these people that find a lot of good politics when it comes to Republican value conservatism, but also are attracted to Democratic Party emphasis on social justice.
So following that very beautiful presentation, there has been some concern, let's put it this way, in some Christian Democrats, and I'm referring here to Christian Democrats in Latin America, for instance, lately. And the reason was this: that middle ground between estatism or liberal capitalism was taken by social democrats. So when you go there and propose a policy which talk about subsidiarity, municipal government, thing of that nature, so that you give to the local people the power to run their own problems, there is a mix of ideologies, if you will, there, Christian Democrat and Social Democrat. But the issue have come down to this: the idea of Christian Democrats about the human person, subsidiarity, and even solidarity is quite different. So what do you say about this situation, this conflict between Social Democrat and Christian Democrat in terms of that middle ground, given the fact that they come from a very different philosophical foundations?
Yes, I would say that not being an expert of Latin American politics, although the Christian Democratic Party of Chile has, at least in early days, been a big inspiration for also our party here in Sweden and many European parties. And you mentioned Eduardo Frei, and I also actually had the opportunity to meet his son, Eduardo Frei the Jr., who once became president and also tried for a second term as president of the Republic of Chile, but then failed. But I would say that the demographic and the economical composition of Latin America and Europe is quite different, and I think that also affects the way of reasoning in some basic economical questions. And when it comes to social democracy, I would also like to tell you that the term social democrats in a country like Portugal is Christian democracy. They actually in Portugal call themselves social democrats, while the Social Democratic Party in Portugal call themselves socialists. And the president, UN Secretary General, is a former party leader of the Socialist Party of Portugal. So I can understand the connection. Here in Sweden, it's although quite clear that the view of the self-determination of the family, the independence of the family, the role of the family, the role of the parents, the role of faith, the role of independent schools, of Christian schools, of religious liberties, of a culture of faith when it comes to euthanasia, maybe not so much there, but definitely when it comes to abortion and ethical principles, makes it quite a clear distinction between Christian democracy and social democracy in a country like Sweden and many European countries, I would say. But maybe that picture is less obvious and is maybe more blurred in Latin America. I don't know about the United States. I've been thinking about the future prospects of your party when it comes to a well-known figure in your politics, also well-known for us, like Bernie Sanders. He does not belong to the Democratic Party, although he ran for being its presidential candidate twice. And he has been able, although it's a small state, I believe he's from Vermont, enter the US Senate. But that is an example of a small party that in one state, maybe it's easy in a small state, has found a candidate. And maybe in a maybe not too distant future, there could be a Christian Democrat running in maybe a smaller state with a Christian Democratic program, attracting moderate Democrats and socially concerned Republicans as some sort of middle ground. Because, I mean, what Bernie Sanders has done is to prove that it is possible to enter the highest positions almost in US politics without belonging to one of the two major parties.
Jim, have follow-up question?
Yes, I found your analysis of Bernie Sanders' example to be very helpful. I appreciate that. I'd like now, though, to shift back to Sweden. The KD in Sweden has had a special focus on the elderly. And I'd like to ask you how, during the time of COVID, have the elderly in Sweden fared? How have they fared, especially in care homes?
Sadly, the answer is that they have not cared so well. We have, of a population of a little more than 10 million people, a total number of deaths in COVID-19 of about 6,500. And we reached the figure 6,000 already in early summer. So we had during the spring many deaths, especially in the elderly homes, among elderly people. They are mostly run, but not always, but they're mostly run by the municipalities, but they could also be private, if we call it so, entrepreneurs or different foundations running them. And it was obvious that the municipalities, but also the authorities on national level did not manage to put rules and use these rules in a strict and thoughtful way, thereby protecting the elderly. We have a municipality just 70 miles south from where I live, where there died 50 elderly people within just a week. There were cases when maybe the elderly themselves were not aware of that, but where their daughters and sons and relatives felt that entering an elderly home would be so dangerous, so that it would better to keep them home, although it was hard to give them correct treatment because it was so dangerous. And there are many reasons why it came about to be this. I think it has been, this is a low paid position. There are a lot of people that don't have a full employment that work among the elderly people. They are hired for a few hours here, a day here, or a week there, but they don't have a permanent position. We have a higher degree of immigrant people working there, and with different cultural features, different cultural traditions. And since Sweden has been very much a country of immigrants the last decades, many of them coming from distant cultures and distant countries, the manners and their national cultures is much more social and maybe much more emotional than that of traditional Swedish people. And therefore, a lot of problems came with the disease through the personnel working with the elderly people. This is not still solved, because you don't create high status on a profession that is for a long term, since many years, since many decades, a low paid, low status position. But this is, of course, something that we have pointed out as a party. But politics is always politics, and to be honest, we have to be honest to each other. That's the one of the key things to be a Christian Democrat in politics, is to be as honest as possible. And that is that our party in our capital, Stockholm, in the municipality, in the city of Stockholm, the political person responsibility for the elderly care is a Christian Democrat. So therefore we got it in our face, because there died quite a few elderly homes in Stockholm, especially some that had survived even the Holocaust, and they were in the mid-90s. And one Jewish elderly home, I read an article about that today, that the disease is back again. And they had survived the Holocaust. They had survived for decades. And now they were in the mid-90s, and COVID-19 came into the elderly home, and they are no longer among us. So although we emphasize questions relating to healthcare, to the hospitals, to the elderly's position in society, and to the elderly homes, and our party gives these questions a face, so to speak, gives these questions its true value in politics. But we also fail. We also are put in positions where it's hard to handle these issues. Please.
Thank you. That seems to me to be an example of Christian Democrat honesty that you've just shown us. If I could reflect for just a bit, we share an emphasis on the primacy of the family, and yet in broad sociological terms, the family, certainly in the United States, is more and more fragmented, more and more torn away from any kind of connection with a location, a place, and more at the beck and call of economic forces, which leads, no surprise, the most vulnerable to be the most damaged. So we have all sorts of economic reasons and all sorts of broken family reasons for abortion, and precisely the same thing happens with the treatment of the elderly. In some cases, of course, a family cannot take care of an elderly member who needs constant immediate care. But in most cases, that's not so. In most cases, families can take care of elderly people who are ordinarily shunted off into nursing homes, and everybody says, oh my, and there's a moment of concern, but only a moment of concern. And once they put on, so to speak, to use a terrible word, a reservation for the elderly, they are sitting ducks. And in my state of California, we now have euthanasia, and it's presented in the most deceptive possible terms. It's regularly called physician-assisted suicide.
Yes.
And whenever you have something that's a blatant, egregious euphemism, I hope that people who are honest from any perspective will say that is a lie.
I think that the question of euthanasia, and although I have not followed specifically my well, it's not a Christian Democratic paper, it's a Christian paper, but it's positive to the Christian Democratic Party where I work. This called Världen idag, the world today. They have today an editorial about euthanasia in the Netherlands, and that what we would call borders or limits, ethical borders, ethical limits are gradually moved step by step. And
yes,
what happens?
It's been
Yeah,
extended to people with dementia.
Extended,
now
yeah,
extended to children.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I follow that because my last name ends in INK, which means I'm Dutch.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's right. You have a Dutch background. Yeah, I understand. Yes.
Tragic.
Yeah, and it started in the Netherlands. It has moved to the other Benelux countries, to Belgium, to Luxembourg, to Switzerland. We see it in a number of liberal US states, but I also saw that the referendums you have, I don't know that well. I haven't studied so well about the euthanasia position, but I saw that when it comes to drugs, narcotics, that a Republican state like Montana voted in favor legalizing narcotics. So I think you have a very strong anti-Christian liberal libertarian attitude in questions here that could melt down the fabric of society in the United States in an extremely dangerous way, and you point out one of those. California, for how long have you had? I think it started with Oregon, maybe in the
yes.
US. For how long have you had it in California?
In California, I'd say 2 years. 2 years.
Yeah.
And it was unanimously supported by Democrat members of the legislature. And it would be very interesting to have an interview, we won't get it, with Kamala Harris.
Yes,
saying,
yes.
Dear lady, spit it out. What exactly is the position you take, given the party in California is to a man, woman, pro-euthanasia? But that won't get asked in any kind of national forum.
No. Well, thank you for mentioning it mentioning it for us, and I would mention it definitely for our paper. You had a referendum in 2018, most likely then, about euthanasia.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was not just passed by the state.
Well, it wasn't a referendum. I'm sorry, not a referendum.
No.
It was
Okay.
an act of the legislature.
In Sacramento. Okay.
Yes, split along party lines, but of course the Democratic Party has a super majority.
Yeah, nowadays they have that. So the Republicans voted against that in California, but the great majority of Democrats they passed it then.
Exactly.
A very, 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 very sad development. I think these questions really show the importance of a Christian democratic political thinking. And could I just put a question and then elaborate a little more what I mean on that question? You said that you quadrupled the number of votes to the White House. How many thousand people in the United States voted for the ASP?
I would say this is what we call a guesstimate. A guesstimate.
Yes, guesstimate. Okay, yes.
4 years ago, 9,000. This year, 40,000.
40,000. Okay, thank you. Yeah, because I would say that Christian democracy holds many important ideological features and treasures, I would say, that would be important for other parties and also not at least for the Republicans to develop. So I would say that although it's hard for you to get a public platform, it's a richness in the ideological and philosophical foundation of your party and the worldwide political community that you are a part of, it being the strongest in Europe, but we have also spoken about Latin America, that you are not just something self-invented in the United States. You can relate to something, and maybe you should also use these relations you have to Latin America, that you have to Christian Democrats in Europe, when writing, when speaking, and emphasizing that this is a rich political tradition that is actually some sort of, I would say, American heartland, although it has never been defined in a specific American party before, because I would say that there would be a, not quoting Richard Nixon now, but some sort of silent majority in the United States that is value conservative, but would like to have more social justice.
Yes.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, we are getting closer to the end of our very, very, very interesting panel. Just a few remarks before closing. What Lennart was saying about the ecumenical dimension of Christian democracy, I think is very important from Europe to the United States to Latin America. And one of the features I think I find very interesting is that we are distant from this emphasis, exaggerated emphasis on economics, economicism, that come from the left, it come from the right. And we need to rehabilitate, I think, the center of our experience, which is politics. And politics is, for the Christian democratic experience, is related to ethics, and then to a view of the human person. And I think that is key. That is why the family is at the center. And if we strengthen that message with, I think, as Lennart said, it will take energy and conviction. I think we will finally we will win, even though that may not be in our lifetime. And so I'm really grateful for Lennart to join us today. And before closing our meeting, Jim, do you want to read the gospel for today?
Could I just say 30 seconds?
Sure.
A heartfelt thank you to you. I think about the American flag is red and blue and white. You have a party which is red in the United States. You have a party that is blue in the United States. And the white color is the color of ethics, of cleanness, Puritanism. Maybe you in the future would have the colors of the 3 colors of the United States flag, thereby declaring for the people that you have the good things from the Democrats, the good things from the Republicans, and the Christian ethics binding that together. And that is ASP, or US Christian democracy.
Thank you very much.
All right then. The gospel for today is from Luke. Jesus said to the crowd, "They will seize and persecute you. They will hand you over to the synagogues and to prisons, and they will have you led before kings and governors because of my name. It will lead to your giving testimony. Remember, you are not to prepare your defense beforehand, for I myself shall give you a wisdom in speaking that all your adversaries will be powerless to resist or refute. You will even be handed over by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will be destroyed. By your perseverance, you will secure your lives. Come, Lord Jesus, come."
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Godspeed.
It's been a great honor to share this hour together with you. God bless you in the United States and the ASP.
I just wonder if there's one last request. One last request. It's
Please.
important for energy and endurance. Can you give us a recipe for blueberry soup?
Yeah, I saw you had that among the questions, and I'm not the right person to do that, but I can tell you that it's a very important element in the Vasaloppet cross-country